As matriculants approach final exams starting on the 30th of October, the period of late-night studying, last-minute cramming and a lack of sleep begins in earnest. This period also comes with anxiety and many other health problems for grade 12 learners, which can negatively impact performance. At the same time, experts advise pupils to get enough sleep, exercise and to eat well during the exam preparations. For more on this too familiar conversation, we are now joined by social worker as well as Parent Centre's PACES program manager. That's Jonathan Hoffenberg. Jonathan, a pleasure to have you on the program this evening. Now, as a social worker and a PACES manager, you have a deep understanding of the challenges that teens face. How significant is the link between exam stress and the rise in self-harm among teenagers based on your experience?
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me. Exams and especially that matric year, which is such an artificial year in many respects, have historically been periods of extreme stress with teens. Also, given that our entire historic school system of 12 years is coming to an end. It's a system that people have acclimatized themselves to. One of the few areas that teens have control over their lives is their socialization, their group of friends. And so there's this almost existentialist dread that is starting to creep up of what is going to happen. I'm going to leave school, some of my friends, I won't be seeing them again, the kind of choices, careers. So it's always been a time of extreme stress. But globally, what we've seen is a massive knock-on of COVID. And if you think of the current group that is writing matric right now, we're going through lockdown at quite a critical part and time of their development. We knew from the research that was coming out of COVID that the two groups of people that were most affected by COVID were the elderly and teens, because teens need social interaction. And so we've got a whole group of teens who have grown up during lockdown who have missed out on a lot of that critical kind of socialization that builds up the resiliency that you need to get through something like matric. Globally, we're seeing much greater rates of teen suicides, of teen self-harm, and teen anxiety.
So the outdated school system and the COVID-19 pandemic have added additional layers of stress for teens. How do you see these factors indeed contributing to this growing mental health concerns among adolescents, especially as they approach these final exams?
Well, I mean, there's a lovely saying that goes that a general always prepares for the war that has passed. And I think the very nature of the education system is we have an education system that is often preparing learners for a world of work that has passed. And if I think of, you can tell by the gray in my beard, that has been many years since I went to school, but the world of work has fundamentally changed. Career pathing has fundamentally changed. We now have a world where people earn their money on YouTube or TikTok, for example. And so I think there's a lot more labor uncertainty, if you look at the recession. But again, globally, the world of work is a much more uncertain place. And that means that a lot of the fallback advice and nuggets of wisdom that often come from that older generation of, the voice of God is going to tell you that you're supposed to be a TV presenter and that's what you'll be for the rest of your life, for example. Those type of things no longer exist. And so I think that we're dealing with so much uncertainty when we're also right now dealing with a situation where a lot of teens are faced with the fact that we've got increased uncertainty in terms of the system of financing in university choices, the cost of higher education, the fact that we have more and more young people who are thinking, do I want to stay in this country? Do I want to move on? And it's all of those decisions at a time when really you want teens to be focused on their exams, and yet there's so many things that are distracting them.
Let's look at the role of parents. Parents often seek solutions and sometimes turn to medication as well. Could you shed light on the risks associated with using, call it prescription meds, to treat teen anxiety? How should parents approach this delicate situation?
I think there's a tendency of parents to intermesh or project their own aspirations, their own academic journey onto their children. They want their children to do better than they necessarily do. And so the first step that I'd say for parents is make sure that what you're wanting for your kids is what you want for your kids and not necessarily what you want for yourself. But I think the other thing is we live such stressful, complicated lives. And often for parents, Matric is suddenly a year where you've got that hyper-focus on your child. When you're juggling your own relationship, your work, etc., and that can often mean that parents, in their own stress, look for easy, simple, fast solutions. But the problem with medication, and medication certainly plays a role, and I don't want to come across as someone that is anti-medication. Meds are great, but at a time when your teens' energy levels, their stress levels, their sleeping regime is up and down, this is exactly the wrong time to, for example, be looking at antidepressants. So if you look at antidepressants, a lot of them are known as SSRIs, which has got to do with serotonin, which is one of the kind of feel-good chemicals in your brain that allows you to focus, that allows you to feel connected. And that's something, for example, like Prozac. But a good SSRI takes 3 months to kick in. And so you have parents, it's the middle of the year, or you've just had prelims, for example, and you're stressed out, your teens don't exactly know what to do, and so you're looking rapidly for solutions. This is not the time to be messing around with medication. And that's why we very much say to parents, it's about encouraging your teen without necessarily focusing on, calculus, for example, or it's providing that support network in which your teen can make the decisions. But critically, it's telling them that they've got to be playing the long game. And I think, again, we come back to the artificiality of the matric as this deciding factor for your future, when we know that in the broader scheme of things, the matric is not that important. And if you don't do well in your matric, there are lots of other solutions that are available to teens to do. So there's so much pressure put on this thing that is so artificial and in many respects so unnecessary in terms of how it affects our children's mental health.
So in stressful times, regression is a common reaction for teens. Could you share practical tips for parents to support their stressed teens, especially during the exam period? How can they create a conducive environment for mental well-being?
So regression is when somebody goes back to an earlier stage of development, and you often see it as a sign of children that they're encountering stress. So, for example, you'll have a teen that wants much more physical affection than they used to, or maybe they want to climb into bed with you and cuddle like they used to, which can, for a lot of parents, be rather charming. Suddenly my teenage daughter that treats me with disdain is suddenly like my baby girl again. But often these actions of regression aren't necessarily that bad. I mean, I don't want to say that they're a bad thing, but they're a sign that your teen needs support. And in terms of support, what can parents do? Well, it's focusing on the fundamentals. What a teen most needs in their stage of development, given puberty, given all the hormones and stuff, is regular consistency. So are they getting enough sleep? Are they getting enough exercise? Are they getting good nutrition? There's a tendency for teens to not focus on their eating. They need to, even though they're sitting at their desk doing a lot of reading and studying, which isn't a lot of physical activity, they're using their brains, which means they need good protein. So I think it's about parents almost going back to the fundamentals. Are you eating okay? Are you exercising? Are you sleeping okay? And then the final thing, which is often something that parents struggle with, a teen that is spending all their time studying is often a bad thing. You need that downtime. You need that connection with your friends. You need that occasional, de-stress in a sense. So there's often a tendency, especially in teens that are very active, that they cut back on all of their extramural activities and they're not socializing. But what parents fail to recognize is a lot of those things are the support mechanisms and the coping mechanisms that keep a teen sane. So maybe actually when your child is studying for matric, that yes, maybe they're doing an hour worth of work and then maybe 10 minutes or 20 minutes of going out into the garden or playing on the Xbox or anything. It's about trying to get a bit of balance. If all they're doing is studying, they're going to literally self-implode.
So, Jonathan, as you know, the mental health of adolescents is a global concern, with 1 in 7 experiencing a mental disorder. In your view, what are societal factors that contribute to the vulnerability of adolescents to mental health problems, and how can these factors be addressed?
Well, so let's talk about the ones that can't be addressed. Humans are a species that actually changes extremely slowly over time. And yet, if we look at what has happened in literally the last 60 or 70 years, since World War II, the changes that have come about, cultural changes, the rise of feminism, how it's impacted on nuclear families, the rise of social media, the fact that this is the first time in history that you have an entire generation that is growing up in the public eye. I mean, I think of my teenagehood and all of the silly stuff that I got up to, and thank goodness there was no TikTok and Facebook, etc. Our children are having their entire lives documented, and they're also seeing an artificial, constructed reality that is social media that invariably often is saying to them, they're not pretty enough, they're not thin enough, they're not, wearing the right clothes. So I think that identity formation is a lot more narcissistic. It's a lot more focused on the self, but at the same time, it's a lot more isolated. Think of that we've turned our children into runway models. They're constantly out there feeling alone, having to show this perfect notion of themselves. And that must be absolutely exhausting. So some of the things that you can do, I think that it is about returning to some traditional family values. Families should be encouraged to be sitting around the dining room table and discussing things. Fathers and moms should be encouraged to be doing housework with their children because it builds rapport. It's very difficult to talk to your child looking into their eyes. It's a lot easier to talk to your child when you're gardening together or when you're walking the dog or when you're washing dishes. And I think it's also about creating moments in your family when you can connect. And that also means getting teens to be socializing with their extended family, especially those family members that might, embarrass them, the gogos that, pinch their cheeks, etc. Because, and this is the other thing, this modern social media orchestrated life where everything is perfect is a false one. Life is full of challenges and arguments and people having different points of views, and social media turns us into echo chambers where everybody says the same things. And when that's a negative echo chamber, we know just how destructive it is for teens.
So you've mentioned the impact of risk-taking behaviors on mental well-being, such as substance abuse as well. I can actually even think of sexual risk-taking as well. How can parents, educators, and society at large play a role in indeed addressing and also preventing these behaviors among adolescents?
Well, I mean, there's a lovely quote from a Greek philosopher called Socrates, where he talks about the youth of today have no respect. They don't, consider the values. They've lost touch with what's important in life. And it's often used by therapists like myself in that we'll read out the text to someone and say, when do you think this was written? And invariably go, oh, this is about today. And you go, well, actually, it was written by a guy, 4,000 years ago. So the one thing that parents need to hear, and it's the thing that parents often don't are honest with themselves. Teens have always been risk takers. It's part of the developmental stage. There has always been risky behavior in terms of, cigarettes and alcohol and sex, etc., etc. I think the thing is that this modern world, there's a lot more access. There's, again, because of social media, there's a lot more in the spotlight. But I think the other thing that has fundamentally changed is in the old days, parents were able to say, for example, marijuana is bad, and if you have one puff of a joint, your life is going to be ruined, and your teen just needs to go onto their phone and go, but Dad, marijuana is being prescribed medically for the treatment of depression. So I think it means that parents these days, if they want to address the risk-taking behavior with their teens, need to move away from punitive, authoritarian mindsets. It's not about, in my house, these are the rules. It's more about creating a communication, a open discourse that allows you to discuss things with teens and to research together and to be looking things up and to be having these type of debates. And that means that you've created a culture where your teens are able to speak to you, which is also something that I think that is important, especially at exam time, which is something that we see often in the universities, in families which have experience of people coming to universities. There's an understanding that at universities people fail, people change. I come in wanting to study engineering and I end up getting a degree in mathematics, for example. But in a lot of first-generation university students, they come in being really, really bright, having never failed anything in their lives, and they get to university and suddenly they're failing. Suddenly they're surrounded by people who are exactly as clever as them, but have a lot more experience in terms of higher learning. And so I think one of the things that parents should also be encouraging is show your children your own humanity. Let them know it's okay to fail. It's okay to not know everything. It's okay to not necessarily have heard that voice that says you are going to be an X for the rest of your life, because that world of work no longer exists.
Jonathan, finally, and what's your overarching message that you have for both parents and teens as they navigate the stressful exam period? How can they maintain perspective and also prioritize mental well-being throughout this challenging time?
I think it's letting children know, and this is the thing that all children need to know. Children need to know that you love them unconditionally. You might not always like them. There are plenty of times when you don't like your teens, but you always love them. And so that's the one thing, we are still in a country, on a continent, where men, for example, particularly really struggle to express their feelings, especially their feelings of vulnerability and softness. And so the first thing that parents should be doing is saying, I love you. I think the second thing that parents should be saying is, it's going to be okay no matter what. And no matter what happens, I will be here for you when you need me. And if you do fail or need to rewrite or don't get the marks you want or don't get into the university you want, life is not linear. It's not A to B anymore. A lot of the time it's a journey. It's, you start off here and you end up somewhere else. And I think that's the thing, as parents, at a time when your teen is hyper-focused, let them know about the broader picture. Let them know that you love them. Take them out of that study room into the garden to smell the beautiful flowers and to get that broader perspective of that life is about change and challenges and the journey, not the destination.
Thanks to our guest, that's Jonathan Hoffenberg. He's a social worker and a PACES manager, for sharing his insights on this critical issue of teen mental health, especially during the challenging exam period. Also